welcome to the Activated Storytellers 50-second podcast, July 12th, 2007.
This week's story is The Talking Mule from South Carolina.
Howdy, I'm Dennis.
And I'm Kimberly.
And I'm Zephyr.
And together we are
the little old Activated Storytellers.
This week we are coming to you from Maryland. Last week we told you the story of John Henry, and Dennis and I biked from Pittsburgh to D.C. We actually were in the middle of that bike trip. We have now completed it.
We have completed the portion called the C&O Canal, the C&O towpath, and that's the part that goes from Cumberland, Maryland to Washington, D.C. But of course we picked up another trail in Pittsburgh, and so we did, as we mentioned, over 330 miles altogether.
Now, I was gone this last week, so tell me what happened to you guys while I was gone. I'm curious to know.
Well, last week we talked a bit about the C&O Canal, but I don't think we told everybody that it was never finished. And also this week, as we finished the path, I think we left you off in Cumberland last time we recorded.
Which is where the C&O trail actually begins.
Right. So this week we actually did the C&O Canal portion of the bike path.
It was never completed. It was begun in 1824. In fact, they began construction on the 4th of July, which is appropriate because we were biking at the 4th of July. Kimberly was, actually. And it was intended to go all the way from D.C. to Ohio, which is why it's called the C&O, the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal. But it was stopped in Cumberland, Maryland.
And it was stopped because people like John Henry started building the railroad. Now, the C&O Canal, when you're traveling along there, you're on boats, and it's being pulled by a team of mules. Average speed was about 4 miles an hour. We doubled that on bicycles easily.
The most interesting thing that I passed on my portion of the ride was Harper's Ferry, West Virginia. Now, I was riding, the path was on the Maryland side of the Potomac River, but I couldn't resist taking the bridge over to Harper's Ferry, West Virginia. As you probably know, Harper's Ferry was where John Brown conducted his famous raid on the ferry in 1859 in an effort to liberate slaves. And he was captured and convicted of treason and executed. But many people say that that little incident is what started the Civil War. So maybe he didn't die in vain.
I actually didn't know that. I'm guilty of not knowing that. How about you?
No, actually, I was a Civil War buff for many years. I studied all about the Civil War, and I don't recall hearing that.
I'd also found out that the whole C&O Canal towpath was conceived by none other than George Washington. He didn't live to see it actually get built, but he is the one who thought of it, and he was the head of the company, ended up building it after he became president of the United States.
That's interesting. I didn't know that.
All right, now we need an update from Zephyr. What were you doing while we were biking along the C&O?
Well, I have been away in North Carolina, and I am pleased to announce that the band now has a new song. It's still being mixed and mastered, so probably won't hear it for another couple of weeks, but it is being mixed and mastered right now. We recorded it in one day. The rest of the band recorded their parts, and then I came up and did mine. Okay,
so we got a new song out of you guys, huh?
We had a new song, and I was up there with my home away from home, with my alternate families in North Carolina, the band moms, we call them.
Yes, and they took good care of you. Thanks to everybody in North Carolina. The C&O towpath ends in Washington, D.C., and I finished out the ride. We took, 7 days to finish the ride?
That's right. I did 3 days, you did 4, and I don't know. I think I averaged more miles per day than you did, but you did more days.
I found out when I got to the end that there are canal boats that you can still ride in Washington, D.C. that are pulled by mules.
I would like to do that sometime.
It looked like fun. The people were dressed as they would have been back when the toll path was being used all the time. And because their mules are such a prominent part of the C&O Canal and the towpath and a way of transportation, we decided to tell you a story this week called The Talking Mule. Actually, I think since Dennis and I told you the story last week, we should take a vacation and let Zephyr tell the story this week.
What?
Uh-huh. It's only fair. After all, you didn't do any work last week.
You're implying that I do work on other weeks?
No. Anyway, here's Zephyr with The Talking Mule.
Long, long ago, in a galaxy far, far away, there lived a boy working on a farm. Oh, I've been working on this farm for my whole life. Now, on this farm, there was a mule, and the mule would work every day except Sundays, which the mule was allowed off. But one day, the boy's father had to go to a funeral. So, the boy's father said,
Luke, I am your father.
I know that, Dad.
You must go out and harness the mule so he can work today, for I have to attend the funeral of Obi-Wan Kenobi.
You have to attend the funeral of Obi-Wan Shish Kebabi?
Never mind. Just go harness the mule.
Well, thanks, Dad. How do you do that? Anyway, the boy went outside, and as he went to harness the mule said, What? Me say Mr. Mule, me no work on Sundays. And the boy said,
Talking Mule!
So, the boy ran back inside just before his father left and told him what he saw. Dad, the mule's talking, and it's like, this talking, and it's telling me that it's a mule, and the mule is talking, and we have a talking mule who talks.
The Force has messed with your mind. Mules do not talk. Go to your star speeder. I will take care of this.
So, the father strode out onto the fields.
Wait, I can't stride out onto the fields. I don't have my large army supporting me. Extras to the set.
Bum 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 ba bum bum ba bum 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 ba bum bum ba bum bum ba bum. Aided by a large army of stormtroopers, the boy's father stormed out to the mule. The boy's father tried to put the harness on the mule, but much to his astonishment and the stormtroopers, the mule said, Mr. Mule, me's no work on Sundays. And the father said,
Oh, talking mule!
So the father went back into the house and said to his son,
Son, you were right. The mule is talking.
Suddenly their dog walked by, and the dog said,
Never talk, you have heard a dog.
Wow, Dad! Now the dog's talking, and it's in broken English. It can't even talk rightly.
Talk correctly.
Yeah, whatever. And the father and son told the wife all about the strange talking animals. And the wife said, Oh, give me a break. Please help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're our only hope. And the boy's father said,
Actually, Obi-Wan died the other day. I was going to go to his funeral.
That's when the cat walked by and said, Oh my, it seems as if you're all rather alarmed by talking animals. And so the story comes to its conclusion, at least until next year's over-budgeted sequel.
And that's the story of the Talking Mule.
The space age version, big budget version. And that story was obviously brought over from Africa. There is an African story about everything talking, including a yam and a stool. And it ends much the same way with the stool saying, That's ridiculous. Imagine a talking yam.
Now, you know what that story was missing, though?
What?
A lightsaber fight.
Yes, it was. You have one?
All right, here's an encore lightsaber fight.
Okay, now we did end our ride in Washington, D.C., and Washington, D.C. is a place we always like to come to. There's some great attractions there. The Smithsonian Institution, which is actually several different museums, incredible museums, and they're all free.
Yeah, I found out about them several years ago when we got booked in Washington, D.C., and I knew that there was museums there, knew I had to go to them. What I couldn't believe is that they were free. Also, one of our favorite campgrounds is in the Washington, D.C. area.
That would be Greenbelt.
Yes, Greenbelt. Very inexpensive to stay there. Of course, there's no power, no hookups, but cheap place to stay. And who stays at the campground when you're in D.C. anyway?
Yes.
Lots to see and do there, including National Theater, a place that we've performed.
Right. It's just down the street from the White House, right in the thick of town.
And you can see some really interesting things in D.C., too. Speaking of D.C. and theater, I actually once had the opportunity to lock the door to the booth where Lincoln was killed by Booth, ironically enough.
Yes, and that was a great memory.
Not Lincoln being killed, but Zephyr.
That's what I meant. Zephyr locking the booth. That was really cool. The ranger let him do that. Oh.
Well, we have a bunch of shows in Pennsylvania coming up. We have Palmyra, Annville, Lebanon, Fredericksburg, quite a few shows in Pennsylvania. And By the time you will have heard this, we will have performed for the first time ever in Philadelphia at the Central Library there.
Later in August, we have some shows not only in Massachusetts, but in Sacramento, California. We've got a couple libraries, and we'll be performing and presenting workshops for the California Homeschool Conference. Now, if you are a talking mule or other animal, give us a call. 206-350-5016 with your comments, questions, and suggestions.
And we want to hear your Star Wars impersonations.
Yeah, that'd be fun. Star Wars and animal impersonations.
I'm sure they're better than mine. I haven't seen those movies in ages.
Not bad, though. I think Zephyr pulled that off pretty well. Whole story by himself.
Yes, I think so.
Kind of makes up for not being here last week.
Strong must one be to do entire story by self ones, yes.
Yes. We'd also like to remind you that this is the final few days here until July 15th for podcastawards.com nominations. So drop by podcastawards.com and nominate your favorite storytellers for something or other.
Otherwise known as us.
And you will find links and show notes at activated.libsyn. That's libsyn.com.
And remember, boldly go where no one has gone before. Okay, I'm sorry. I couldn't help it. I had to squeeze a Star Trek in there somewhere.
Where are we going anyway? What's coming up next week? What do we have planned for our podcast listeners?
Well, we are going to Philadelphia, so we might talk about something there.
We might. We'll see what we can round up for you next week. Thanks for listening.
May the Force be with you.
The Activated Storytellers perform at schools and libraries nationwide. On stage, we use American Sign Language, physical comedy, imaginative props, and a giant, oversized book to bring the stories to life. For booking information, check our website at www.activated-storytellers.com, where you can also find out when the Activated Storytellers will be performing near you. Read a story or order one of our audio CDs. Until next time.